Do you ever wonder what might happen to you if somebody puts lye in your drink, black coffee, regular coffee, whatever? Well, if you're not dead, Burt Young will show you what happens. Takes a sip, falls off the back of his chair, jumps up, runs out of his social club, and you better hope there's a bathroom close by. Hey everybody, welcome to another sit down with Michael Franzese. Hope everybody is doing well, and today is always a favorite of my followers. It's Mob Movie Monday. And before we get into Mob Movie Monday, again, 600,000 subscribers. You know how much I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Keep tuning in, keep subscribing. We're racing towards that 1 million subscriber mark, hopefully by the end of the year. The crew is growing. We're doing these live sit downs. People are enjoying it. You're asking me a lot of questions. Got to jump on board. MichaelFranzese.com, join.michaelfranzese.com if you want to get into the inner circle. So all that stuff is moving along. A lot of great things coming up this weekend at the Soprano Con in Atlantic City. I'm going to be there. Going to be sitting down with Armand Assante, Michael Madsen, a bunch of others, the cast of The Sopranos. I'll be sitting down with many of them. You'll get an opportunity to see it on YouTube coming up, so I'm looking forward to that. I'm excited to meet Armand. He's a great guy, class act, brilliant actor, and you know how I loved him in the movie Gotti and other movies that he's done. So looking forward to that. Today, we're going to do an old favorite of mine, and when I say old, it's back into the 1980s, kind of my era in that life, and I really enjoyed this movie when it came out. The Pope of Greenwich Village. Came out in 1984. For those of you who haven't seen it, you got to see it. For those of you who have seen it, I'm sure you liked it. It was a great film. It starred Mickey Rourke and Eric Roberts, Daryl Hannah, and Burt Young. They were the main cast. And they really did a great job. And, you know, one of the reasons I like that movie, there was a real reality to it. You know, I talk about my former life, and I know a lot of you people get the wrong impression about my life. And maybe because of things you see on YouTube, things you see in the media, you know, some of the movies that came out, you don't really understand the life. You know, a lot of people talk about it in terms of that every day was another disaster, another adventure, you know, who was getting killed, who was getting shot at, who was getting shook down, who was getting extorted. You know, it wasn't like that at all, at least not from my perspective. I spent over 25 years, or about 25 years in that life, and I certainly did not experience it in that way. And most of the guys that I was around did not experience it that way. You know, just like regular life, there is a kind of class category in that life. There are the guys that, you know, dress up pretty good every day. They're the earners. You know, they go out and earn money for the family because regardless of what you might think, without money, it falls apart. Okay, it's like anything else. It's money that supports that lifestyle, and the guys that earn money, they were held in pretty high regard as long as they did it the right way. They shared, they weren't greedy, they were needed, they were necessary, they were kind of backbone of their life. Then there were some guys that, yeah, you know, whether made guys or associates, they did their thing, you know, they made a living. They maybe weren't earning a lot of money, but they were guys that were reliable. They held their own. The family didn't have to support them. They were able to make a living on their own. They did what they had to do when they had to do it. And there were a lot of made guys in that category. And then there were those guys that were, you know, just unfortunate. They just didn't know how to earn a real living. Yeah, they were involved in some of these shakedowns and extortion attempts. Some of them had, you know, maybe a union no-so jobs. The family tried to help them out, support them in the best way that they could. And yeah, they did a lot of the work because what else were they going to do? But again, everybody that was a made guy in that life was capable of doing what they needed to do when they were told to do it. It wasn't an option. You were told to do something, you had to do it. That was it. But this movie, you know, describes a lot of the associates that were around us. And what do I mean by that? They were guys that were kind of hanging on a little bit, trying to make themselves useful, trying to show people that they were relevant in that life. You know, maybe they would bring a score in here and there. You know, they wanted to be somebody and get somewhere in that life. And that's what this movie is about. It's about Mickey Rourke, who plays Charlie. He's not a made guy, he's an associate. and his cousin Paulie, who was played by Eric Roberts, did a great job. The two of them did a great job. And they were kind of dreamers. You know, they wanted to be street guys in a way, but they really had dreams of being successful at something in their life. Mickey Rourke, he wanted to own a restaurant. He wanted to make enough money, maybe 75 grand, I think he needed, something like that, so he can open up his own restaurant, kind of live happily ever after. But he knew the street. He was kind of a street guy. He had some of those tendencies. His cousin Paulie, who seems like he wasn't all there. He wasn't playing with a full deck. He was a good character in that movie. He was always scheming, trying to find a score, trying to do something that was going to get him into the big time. And you know what? I knew guys like that. There were guys in that life that were almost exactly like Charlie and Paulie. And then you had Burt Young, who was kind of the local mob boss. He wasn't really a boss, but maybe he was a captain, a capo regime, capo. You know, he had his social club. He had his group of guys around him, and he was kind of the local made guy that everybody had to watch out for. And then you had Paulie's cousin, who was another made guy. He was in Burt Young's crew. So that was kind of the cast of characters. And then you had Daryl Hannah, who was Charlie's girlfriend, who was always trying to get Charlie to straighten out. You know, Charlie, you got to do the right thing. You got to straighten out. She didn't like Paulie, his cousin, too much because she thought he was nuts, that Charlie hanging out with him wouldn't get him anywhere. And she was right. At the end of the day, she was right. But Charlie had this dream. He had affection for his cousin, Paulie. They worked in a restaurant together. Paulie got them fired because he did something with a check. And now Charlie and Paulie are out on the street again, and they have to earn a living. So Paulie's always coming with these schemes. You know, he's coming with these schemes. The biggest scheme that he comes by, and I got to say this before I go any further, one thing that really caught me on this movie, it was the Frank Sinatra song, The Summer Wind. They play it in different sections of the movie. I love Sinatra, and I happen to love that song. When I first heard it, it reminded me of the time I was in my Eldorado convertible, and I was driving down, I think it was A1A in Florida. I had the top down. It's great, right? And I'm listening to The Summer Wind, and I'm sitting next to my girlfriend at the time, Camille, who's now my wife of many, many years. And for some reason, you know how there's things in your life that just happen to stand out, you know, moments, little things that stand out. Well, that was one of them. And every time I hear that song, it reminds me of the movie, and it reminds me of driving down A1A. I love Florida. Most of you people know that. With my Eldorado convertible. It was a good time for me, and I was in the gas business, making a lot of money. We don't have to go over that again. And just loving Florida. And I tell you, I know I jump around a little bit, but, as things come into my head, I share them with you. I love Florida. And the reason I love Florida, way back in the day, I had bought a house in Delray Beach. I bought it on the water, on the Intracoastal. I had 2 boats in the backyard. But during that time, it was a very turbulent time in my life. I had been indicted several times. There was a lot of stuff going on in the street. I had a lot of responsibility as a capo regime. My father was in and out of prison. A lot of stuff going on. Giuliani was about to indict me. Things like that were going on. And I used to go down to Florida. I'd jump in my jet. They'd fly me down to Florida. I had, the private airport wasn't too far from my house. I would go to the house all alone, and I would sit in the backyard, and I had to drink a club soda, whatever I was drinking. I wasn't a drinker at the time. I'm not a drinker now. And I would just watch the boats go by on the Intracoastal. And it just was the most soothing, calming, relaxing thing at that point in time. So during the most turbulent times of my life, I loved to be sitting in my backyard on the Intracoastal watching the boats. There's nothing more relaxing than the water when the water is calm and the weather is beautiful. I just loved it. So I got off on a tangent a little bit, but that's okay. Gets back to the movie. Anyway, Summer Wind, great Sinatra song. All the songs are great, but that one just hits me. So they get fired, and Paulie, he's not worried about it. He's going to come up with another scheme to make money, and he does. It's kind of a big scheme, this one. It's going to be a big score. I think $150,000. And they happen to meet with a guy, he's the local locksmith, and Paulie knows him, and he tells him about this score. There's a safe that's in a building that he happens to know the money is there. So he shares this with Charlie. And Charlie, at first he's kind of reluctant. He knows Paulie's a little bit of a screwball at times, but he wants to go along with it. Paulie convinces him. Okay. So they get in touch with the locksmith. They tell the locksmith about the deal. He can break the lock. They make a plan to go into the building. In the meantime, Charlie tells Daryl Hannah something of the nature. I don't know if he filled her in on everything, but he tells her Paulie came up with a score. She tries to talk him out of it. She says, Charlie, come on. when are you going to wise up and smarten up? Paulie's only going to get you in trouble. Charlie's not paying attention. He goes forward. There's kind of a, they love each other, Daryl Hannah and Charlie and Mickey Rourke, but you can see that she's actually a bit smarter than he is. There's a couple of things, that happened in this movie. The local cop there that gave him a ticket, he got very mad. As a matter of fact, they towed his car away. So there's a great scene when Paulie puts something in the cop's drink at the bar, and it makes the cop have to go to the bathroom, and Paulie's watching him, and it's just a whole funny scene. You'll see it. So Paulie's doing things like this all the time. So anyway, now they're going to go set up this big robbery, this big safe robbery, and they set it up. And then another character is introduced, and he's a cop. He's an undercover cop, and he's been on an investigation of Burt Young, the mob boss. He's actually been taping him. He's been talking to him. There's some things going on that were illicit. Burt Young doesn't realize that Bunky is a cop and that he's recording everything. Bunky's got an interesting lifestyle. He's a detective, but he lives with his mother. They're Irish, and his mother's a tough old Irish woman. She loves her son. And we see a scene where Bunky is leaving. He's going out on night duty, and it was something to do with this whole undercover investigation with Burt Young. He happens to go into the building when Charlie, Paulie, and the safecracker, who's another Irish guy, by the way, are getting into this safe. They get into the second floor, the three of them do. The locksmith is working on the safe. They get past the first lock. They're going on to the second one. Bunky happens to enter that building, and he hears something going on. So he gets up to the second floor, guns raised. The other three guys now, they hear him, and they're all kind of hiding. It's dark in the building. And what happened, as Bunky proceeds to try to find them, he falls down an elevator shaft and dies. Mickey Rourke goes and sees him, sees the body. They find out that he's a cop. A lot of trouble. Cop gets killed during the commission of a crime. Now, I don't know if you know this, but that's life in prison, and it might even be the death penalty in New York at the time. So now they're all worried. Charlie is worried. He's wondering why there was a cop investigating this. He figures out Paulie is not telling him something. So he's very upset with Paulie. There's a scene where he's really knocking him around, nailing him. Paulie, you're not telling me something. What's going on here? It turns out that this money in the safe belongs to Burt Young, the mob boss. And now Burt Young finds out that he's robbed. He puts word out on the street. I want to find these guys no matter who they are. Let's find them. Charlie is mad. Paulie, are you out of your mind? Do you realize what you did? Now you're going to have this guy on top of us. We're going to have a lot of trouble. The investigation goes on the street with Burt Young. They get the money. And there is a scene there similar to the scene in Goodfellas, if you remember, when they did the Lufthansa robbery. The money came back, and Robert De Niro tells everybody, don't spend a dime. We want all the heat to go off us. Nobody spends anything. He got really upset when the guy comes in with a mink coat that he bought for his wife, and he gets really upset about it. Well, the same thing here. Charlie tells Paulie, you don't spend a dime, not one penny. Let this thing calm down. Paulie saying, even just a few bucks, not one penny. That's it, right? So anyway, the investigation goes on, and it does lead back to Paulie at least. So what happens? Paulie is, I believe he's at the racetrack or somewhere near the track. Paulie's cousin, who happens to be a made guy, one of Burt Young's crew, comes and sees Paulie at this stable. Puts him up against a fence, and he said, listen, the boss knows what happened to the money. Now, Paulie first denies it, but then he cracks. And he said, okay, I got 50 grand. That was my share. His cousin says, give me back 43. Tell him you spent 7, and I'll do my best to try to get you out of this. But he said, you got to pay a price. Now, this is false. I never seen anything like this happen. I never heard anything like this happen. But his cousin tells Paulie, you're going to have to pay the price. And paying the price meant that he was going to cut his thumb off. So there is a scene there when they cut Paulie's thumb off. Paulie is screaming. That's it. Next scene. Paulie's got his hand all bandaged up. Charlie goes to see him, and Paulie's screaming out, they took my thumb. Charlie, they took my thumb. Eric Roberts was great in this movie, by the way. Julia Roberts' brother, if you don't know that. He was great in this movie. He's great in a lot of movies, but really good in this one. He's a wreck. He's on painkillers. Charlie wants to know if he gave him up. Did you tell your cousin that I was involved? Paulie said, no, I would never do that. Never do that. Oh, I don't want to forget the scene. There's a great scene with Bunky's mother, the Irish woman, is sitting in her chair. She was terrific. She played a terrific role here, older woman. And 2 detectives come and visit her because there was some kind of maybe suspicion that Bunky was doing something wrong, that he was on the take or whatever. They didn't realize he was in this undercover investigation. They wanted to know what he was doing on that elevator shaft in that building that belonged to somebody. So anyway, they start to question her, and they tell her she's a tough Irish woman, and she loved her son. And they start to get a little rowdy with her, and they tell her, we want to go check Bunky's room. And she said, you're not going in the room. And they said, no, whether you like it or not, we're going in the room. And she says, okay, why don't you do that? And she says, because as soon as you leave the room, I'm going to toss this house, turn it upside down. I'm going to call the Daily News and all the newspapers. My brother's a priest. He said, and we're going to get on all the media and we're going to tell them how 2 cops came in here and disrespected and roughed up a hero in her son. She said, do it. And I love one thing she said. He says, my Bunky was as tough as nails, and he didn't get that from his father. Got it from her. It was a great scene. She was brilliant in that scene. And then the sad thing, the cops leave. They don't want any part of that. And after that, she kind of breaks down because she realizes she really lost her son. It was a heartwarming scene, brilliantly acted. But anyway, as we move on, as it turns out, Paulie did give up Charlie on this. And by the way, Charlie loses Daryl Hannah. He gets his take on the money, he hides it, he gets home one day, and there's a note from his girlfriend, Daryl Hannah, who happens to be pregnant, and she tells him, Charlie, I took the money, it's going to take care of me and the baby, I left you a few bucks, but that's it. Charlie goes crazy, starts banging the walls and everything else. Now he doesn't even have the money to show for it. He loses his girlfriend, he's a wreck, right? I got to tell you, stuff like this happens on the street all the time. You know, there's some guys that just happen to be, they live under a black cloud. Almost everything they does turns bad. You know, we saw that in a couple of movies. Remember in The Bronx Tale, you know, the one guy that anytime he placed the bet, everybody's going to lose. He was just unlucky. You know, I saw guys like that on the street. I don't know what it is. You know, you call it karma. I don't believe in that. Some guys just are unfortunate, man. They have this black cloud hanging over them. It seems like Charlie had this black cloud, but there was a little daylight in that. There's another scene where Paulie has this tip on a horse. So they go, and Paulie wants to bet the farm on the horse. Charlie, he doesn't bet the farm. He backs up his bet a little bit. The horse loses, of course. Paulie's a wreck. You know, what am I going to do? But Charlie won 20 grand. He bet the right way on it, and he did happen to win some money on it. That's towards the end. I have to bring that up now before I forget. Anyway, now Charlie's in trouble because Burt Young, the mob boss, knows what's happened. Paulie has to go work for the mob boss to kind of pay off the debt, the $7,000. He's working with a bad thumb. He's in the club. Charlie goes to visit Burt Young, walks right in the door, goes to visit, sits down with him in the back room and tells him straight out, you know, I did this and you're not going to do anything about it. Burt Young is getting upset. He's the boss. You know, Burt Young was kind of a hapless mob boss in this. He wasn't a dignified mob boss. He's wondering why Charlie is challenging him. And Charlie tells him, I got a tape. And he's got the tape, okay, with Burt Young doing these illicit deals with the cop. So he's got him on tape. So he's protected himself. In the meantime, we see Paulie come in and serve coffee, and he serves it to Burt Young. Charlie walks out. He's okay now. And all of a sudden, Burt Young takes a sip of the coffee, falls back in his chair. He's on the floor, runs out of the thing. He's out of the social club that he's in and runs down the street. Paulie had put some lye in the black coffee. Throws off the apron, comes out with Charlie, and he says, hey, Charloots, that's what he called him. He said, it ain't bad. We got 20 grand, and, you know, life's another good day for us. The song, you know, Summer Wind comes on, they start walking down the street, and that's it. And this all takes place in Greenwich Village, a place that I knew well, especially back then. Was there countless times during the week for different things that I had to do in that life. That's how the movie ends. So, you know, it turns out okay for them, but really was a great movie. It was acted well. I just love that era. Obviously, it was my era. And again, here's 2 hapless dreamers in a way that are just trying to, you know, eke out a living and make their dream come true. And how many people do you know like that? You know, I know some people like that. You know, not everybody in life wants to be a millionaire. Not everybody in life wants to have every toy that you could have in life. Some people just want to be comfortable, and they work towards that. And, you know, I've realized in life, I've had it all, people. You know, I've had tremendous amount of money. I've lost a tremendous amount of money. I've lived very high, and I've lived very low as a prisoner. sleeping in somebody else's underwear in a 6x8 cell for almost 3 years. So I know what it is to be on the top, I know what it is to be on the bottom, and I actually know what it is to be in between also. I've lived kind of all three of those lives. And I've really learned. I don't know about all of you. Yeah, it's nice to have a lot of money and all of that, but you can only spend so much. And after a while it becomes, okay, I've got it. I've got that plane, I've got this, I've got that. And it's not that big a deal. But I found out in life, if you can pay your bills, if you can have some peace of mind, if you can go out to eat when you want, drive a decent car, go on vacation, once or twice a year, and have your family and friends around you who love you, if you can have that kind of lifestyle, when you've really succeeded in your life. And I really mean that. You don't have to reach for the stars. A lot of times when I speak, I go into high schools, I go into even grammar schools, I speak to, a lot of kids throughout my 20 years speaking. And sometimes I would see on the wall, in the auditorium where I would speak or in the gymnasium, you follow your dreams, you can be whatever you want in life. You know what? I think that's a big lie. You can't be whatever you want in life. I'll give you an example. When I was a kid, I wanted to play center field for the New York Yankees. Mickey Mantle was my idol, but there was one problem. I was a fairly good baseball player. I wasn't good enough to play with the Yankees. Sometimes you just don't have the talent, you just don't have the ability to succeed in the area that you want to succeed in. I'd love to be able to play a musical instrument. I just never had the drive to be able to teach myself. I wish I could sing, really great. How many people want to be like Frank Sinatra? Only problem, we're not all gifted with that kind of voice. But you know what? You can find your place in life. If you be realistic about it, we all have a gift or a talent that God will allow us to use. And that's what you have to seek in your life. That's what it is. Be realistic about your dream, and then you can achieve and attain that dream. So that's what kind of this movie, in a way, reminds me of. So that's why I'm kind of leaving you off with this. But great movie, Pope of Greenwich Village. If you haven't seen it, you might have to invest. I don't know if you can get it on YouTube. If you're part of my crew, we're going to put it in the crew. We're going to put it in the inner circle. That's one of the advantages you get. If you want to be a member of the crew, michaelfranzese.com. You want to be in the inner circle? Join.michaelfranzese.com. I welcome you aboard. We'd love to have you. We're doing a lot of great things. So that's it for today. My friends, how do I always leave you? I leave you the same way. It comes from the heart. Be safe. Be healthy. God bless. Yes, I will see you next time.